Amadeus smiled, his eyes lingering proudly on the glistening solar panels he had spent the entire day assembling. He'd decided to display it atop the roof of his home, which was nestled just under the hills of the stretching valley that moved into mountains, higher than the eye could see. Beads of sweat collected on his forehead, and he could smell the stink of his day's work beginning to waft around him. Desperately, he needed a bath. Chuckling to himself, he began to climb down, careful to wedge his feet in the right places of his house, so as not to fall and collapse onto the grass. "Amadeus, you have outdone yourself," he praised himself, short of breath as he tried and almost failed to gracefully descend the wall of his house. 12 hours. 12 hours of work. How he had not completely fainted or given up was a miracle to him, an absolute miracle. The wind swept the grass, swaying at his feet, touching lightly at his ankles as if to say, "You did well today." And oh, didn't he believe it? He sighed, satisfied with himself, turning to enter his house. That was until another force of wind swept over the valley, causing him to turn to the view of his home. No horizon could be met from where he was. Everything around him were walls of grassy hills and rocky, sometimes snowy mountains if he dared to look close enough. His horizon was not smooth and beautiful, but rather rough, rigid. Unremarkable, but still a striking sight. It was something he had always appreciated about his home, something he had always found so comforting, and it was that this little corner of the world was mostly hidden, protected, where everywhere else was plain in sight, and there was no hiding most of the time. His little corner of the world, his home, was mostly shaded by the mountains and his hills that surrounded him. It was calming, the valley, but he had not realized. And when the thought finally settled within him, followed by that sinking feeling, it was much, much too late. He, in fact, was very well hidden within the valley. Too well hidden. His home was almost never in direct sunlight, let alone his roof, which meant his 12 hours of useless work was exactly that. Useless. Wasteful. And how he had praised himself so highly before, how idiotic it all felt now. How stupid it all felt. He stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to decipher his own thoughts, trying not to panic. It couldn't have all been for nothing. It couldn't have. He took a deep breath in at first, allowing the fresh air to enter his lungs, and raised his head to the sky. Soon it would be nightfall and the stars and moon would be welcomed into a black sky, the sun completely out of sight. His thoughts flooded with possibilities. Impossible, dangerous possibilities. But perhaps, if he was lucky, solutions. He couldn't very well move the house. It would be much too heavy and much too time-consuming to even attempt it. After all, he had spent all the time and effort putting together the solar panels on the roof of his house that it would be completely wasted if he was forced to do it all over again, and demolish and reassemble the house to move it. No, he would not do that. But perhaps with a little touch of magic and an immense amount of luck, he could move the sun. Well, not him, of course. But if by some miracle he could get the sun to move for him, well, he would go down in the history books, wouldn't he? Suddenly the idea seemed very appealing. His thoughts began to race for ways to do it. How could he pull off such an impossible thing? Could he dare? He moved to the dirt, snapping off a piece of a branch from a nearby tree and using the sharp end to draw on the ground. Brainstorming, he made a list of things he could do. Summon the sun, try to attract it with the shiniest materials he could find, call upon it with the use of vulgar insults. None of those seemed at all effective. He knew of no ritual to summon the sun. In fact, he didn't think anyone had ever successfully brought the sun to their door or moved it. But he knew one ritual, something his aunt had taught him many years ago. She had been rich in knowledge of the occult and had once successfully summoned the moon, a secret she had told no one but Amadeus. and he had kept that information locked away and had never found an opportunity to use that information until now. The moon was not the sun, but they were close. Where one went, the other would follow. He was sure of it. Jumping up, he scratched away his other options on the dirt and flung his head to the sky. Still not completely dark, but any sign of the sun's yellow light had faded. The only thing left was the remnants of its rays in the sky. A dull grey and faded blue, not even a cloud. A hint of the stars had appeared, but no sign of the moon just yet. Amadeus rushed inside his house, grabbing a piece of paper and writing as much as he could remember of the ritual his auntie had taught him, as if all he had remembered since the years she had taught him would suddenly vanish the moment he needed them. He wrote everything in painstaking detail, gathering the herbs he had in his kitchen and forming a salt circle on the grass for protection. He reread the order of the ritual again and again before beginning to attempt it. Never before had he summoned the moon or done any sort of magic this grand and dangerous. So he made a mental note that the odds of this being a success were slim to none, so very near impossible. He wouldn't even attempt it if he hadn't known that his aunt had done so and succeeded. After he was done with reading and preparing every ingredient he needed, the moon was in plain sight, high in the sky, illuminating the valley in its bright silver-white light, enchanting. He began the ritual, focusing hard on the inflections of his voice as he spoke loudly and sprinkled the herbs on the ground. Hoping there wasn't anyone watching that could see what he was doing, how strange he would seem. Then he began to dance, digging his feet into the ground and drawing symbols into the dirt with his legs, waving his arms around the way his auntie had taught him, allowing himself to be one with the night, making sure he stayed within the protection circle. He repeated the ritual about 5 times in perfect succession, never once making a mistake. And by the 6th time, he was exhausted, collapsing onto the ground and laying his head flat on the grass, staring up at the sky. The midnight canvas was sprayed and scattered with stars, the rays of the moon's light bathing him with a brightness he had never witnessed before. Could it be that the moon was shining brighter from his ritual? Or perhaps he was imagining it, and it, in fact, wasn't doing that at all. It didn't matter. He didn't know. All he could do was wait. And wait he did. To his amazement, he didn't need to wait for long. The moon began to descend from the sky, leaving a trail of silver light behind it. It shrunk to the size of a mere playing ball and landed at his feet, floating above ground. He blinked, mouth agape, unsure of what to say. What does one do when the moon comes to visit? "Hello," he managed. No response. The moon gave no response, and he felt almost stupid for trying it in the first place. But he remembered what his auntie had told him, that he should never mistake the moon for stupid, that the moon would always understand but may sometimes prefer to be silent. He cleared his throat, aware of the great power he had before him, and it suddenly occurred to him to bow. He simply stood there, fiddling with his hands as he prepared a broken explanation for why he summoned it. "I was wondering if perhaps you may help me to convince the sun to move its position in the sky." The moon did not respond. "If you do not mind, I will hide you away from sight, and you will be returned as soon as the sun agrees to move. Is that okay?" No response. But the moon did not make to move away or return to the sky. It simply stood there, as if it wasn't even listening. As if it was soaking in the world. He took it as a yes, and carefully grabbed the moon, gently moving it into his house, and placing it snug inside his wardrobe, under a pile of clothes. Out of sight. All he had to do left was wait. So, wait he did. First came the stars. They moved like worried children, lost and searching for their parents. It was beautiful, and Amadeus would have enjoyed it if only the risk of being found out was so close. They searched the valley like fireflies, floating around worriedly. None of them thought to enter his house and explore. They all searched the outside, through the trees, within the river, and through the hidden crevices of the mountains and hills. It was glorious, the sight of 1,000, a million stars all scattered across his home, across the valley. Not a single one in the sky. How dark the rest of the world must have been. How confused they must have been to realize that no light illuminated the sky. He waited patiently, and when they finally left, they didn't return to the sky. Instead, they traveled where the sun had set that day, and immediately he knew where they were going. Very soon he should see the sun. Deciding there was no point staring at the window and watching, he took his leave into his chamber and allowed himself a good night's rest. Resting his eyes, sleep overtook him. When he awoke, he was almost convinced that the ritual, the stars in the valley, and the empty sky were all but a dream. It was until he checked his wardrobe that he realized it wasn't. To his surprise, and perhaps a little concern, he realized that the sky was completely empty and no sun in sight. It was still night. How was that possible? He checked the time. It should be morning. Why had the sun not risen? Was it afraid that the same thing that happened to the moon would happen to it? No, it couldn't be. The sun and the moon were celestial creatures. They were what controlled the world. They couldn't be afraid of anything. He waited a little longer. The dark made him tired. He rested his head on the pillow and fell back into a deep sleep, one he didn't seem to know how to wake from. And he wondered who else in the world was awake and confused by the night sky. It was his parting thought before his eyes closed and threatened to never open. A violent knock shook his house, and he started at the sound. Jumping from his covers, he made his way to the front door. He made a quick glance at the window, and through it, he saw an endless night. For once, a little fear tickled at him that the night would be there forever, that it would never leave until he returned the moon to its rightful place. His auntie had not informed him about this part, perhaps because she had never attempted to steal the moon and move the sun. Somehow he convinced himself it was all right, and this was to be expected for what he wanted to pull off. He made his way to the door, opened it, and in his shock and amazement, he backed away from the bright, beautiful male in front of him. Tall and a little slender, the man had a face carved and sculpted by gods. His skin seemed to glisten in the firelight, tanned with a few golden specks. His hair was a golden blonde, a deep kind of blonde that shone as if it were spun gold, and his eyes matched the same shade as his hair, glowing brightly in the darkness. "Hello," said the stranger, his face solemn, as if he had lost something. "Hello," said Amadeus nervously. "How can I help you, good sir?" "My name is Zone," he explained, his face neutral, almost expressionless, but there was something fragile about his energy, something that suggested he would blow up at any moment, that his anger hung by a thread. "I'm looking for my wife, Lune." It suddenly sunk within Amadeus who and what this person was. He felt his heart leap to his throat, and he thought if he spoke he might be unable to breathe. Thankfully, Zone didn't seem to notice, and he simply interrupted as he looked around the place. "I was told she was in this valley. You are the only person who seems to live here." Amadeus gathered the rest of his courage that was left and took in a deep inhale. "Lune? I've never heard of a woman with that name around these parts. What does she look like?" There was a certain type of irritation in Zone's eyes, and he realized he had pushed a button. "You know who Lune is," Zone said. "It is why no light is in the sky. It is why the world is in darkness. If you simply show me the direction from which she went, or better yet, tell me where she is, I won't have to make things difficult." "Do you speak of the moon? I was not aware she was your wife." He was telling the truth, half stalling so he could bring himself to request for the sun to move. "Say, what if I did know where she was?" "Yes," Zone urged. "What if I was the only one to know where she was?" Amadeus dared to smile. Zone's muscles tensed, his jaw clenching. "I would be very careful what you say next." You cannot kidnap the moon and expect no consequences. And who will issue those consequences? Amadeus asked, beginning to get much too bold. You? Amadeus leaned on his doorframe. She came willingly, you know, or as willingly as one can be when they can't speak. She could have left at any moment, but she stayed. Zone frowned. Your point? My point is that if you try to get rid of me, you would never get her back. I am the only one who knows where she is, and I am completely willing to negotiate her return. He was bluffing, but he was doing it well. He could feel the anger seeping from Zone, but the sun, personified, could do nothing about it if he wanted his wife back. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. What do you want? I want you to change your position in the sky so that my solar panels on the roof are brightly shone on all year round, Amadeus explained. He almost laughed out loud at the absurdity of such a request, the lengths he had gone to for those solar panels. Even Zona seemed surprised, eyebrow raised. That's all? Amadeus simply nodded. That is all, and I will give her back to you. Fine, said Zone. It is done. I will change my position immediately. Now return my wife. Amadeus beamed. He couldn't believe it had worked. He rushed into the house, eager to find the moon in the wardrobe, buried under his clothes. When he reached his room, he felt all the blood rush out of his body when he saw that the wardrobe was open, and a trail of silver footprints was seen exiting the wardrobe and staining his scattered clothes on the ground. The moon, Lune, had left. Fear took hold of him now, and he felt himself begin to panic. No, 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 no. He rushed outside to where Zone was and gulped. She's not where I put her. Zone frowned. What? He said in a deadly quiet voice. I don't know where she is. A mistake. A stupid mistake to have told him. He realized it the moment he saw the rage flash in Zona's eyes. He should have left. He should have run away and tried to hide from Zona the moment he realized the moon was gone. Instead, he had confessed he was unable to retrieve his wife, and now he could see death flash before his eyes. A blinding flash of light surrounded him, and then blackness. All that was left were the man's feet in a pile of ashes as he had exploded at the will of the sun. Without his wife, Zona left the valley, but Lune had chosen not to be found. She had wanted to explore the human world more. She didn't emerge from hiding, even when the world was plunged into endless darkness. Even when banners had been put up and a search had begun. Everyone in the world was desperate to find her, desperate to bring back daylight, as the sun couldn't rise if the moon was not there to help him. She had spent much too long working, thousands of years, millions of years, working and circling Earth over and over and over, and never once had she been allowed to explore it. So now, this was her chance, and she had no intention of returning.